Friday night.
It's Friday night.
At
We're
least one
talking
of us is dealing
triathlon.
with heat and one of us is not.
It's so funny, I've been avoiding the heat all summer and just staying one step ahead of it. We were in Portland a couple weeks ago, and it was just like 65, 70 degrees, and we're just like living the dream. And then as soon as we leave, this huge, massive heat wave hits.
Uh,
And then we were in Southern Oregon, and we dealt with like 101, 102 and for a few days, and then we got out and hit the coast. We went from 102 to 60 degrees for the high in one
hmm.
in one day. It was a two and a
Wow.
half hour drive.
Oh, goodness.
And so then we went down the coast, and now we're at Mammoth, and actually they're having a heat wave for them here
Yeah.
because it's been in the mid 80s, and like up here nobody has air conditioning,
No, that's right. Right.
so we've been
Mid
actually
80s
having.
at that elevation does feel a little different too. So,
Yeah, and it doesn't, like, it's been weird because it hasn't been windy at night, so we've had our windows open, but we haven't been able to cool the place.
mm. Yeah, I saw your pictures on
So
Strava. It looks wonderful.
these are problems. It is a wonderful place. I highly recommend people to come up here and do a little altitude training.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's well, that's what we're gonna talk about tonight a lot is altitude and how athletes deal with it. Why athletes would want to train at altitude, because
Hmm.
we always hear about this, right? Like you watch, a lot of people are watching the Tour de France right now, and the Olympics are coming up, and
Hmm.
and everyone's talking about this person spent this amount of time at altitude, and so then today we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about potentially how long the benefits can last, what the benefits actually are. It is interesting stuff for sure. And John, I know you haven't done a lot of altitude. Have you ever?
No, I haven't. And so I'm not as well read in this area, other than looking at some altitude stuff and, going up Everest and looking at the numbers and trying to get a sense of why it's so hard to climb Everest without oxygen.
Yeah.
And you just don't have enough oxygen that you can get a hold of in your lungs. And your VO2 max, if you did it at Everest, actually, I don't recall the number right now, but it may be as low as 10, 15 mLs per kg per minute, which, normally for an athlete, we're talking over 50 mLs per kg per minute. So your max VO2 is very low. So your ability to exercise in Everest obviously is tough, and that's why they're walking, and it takes so long just to do 100 yards.
It is amazing that, it's at 10,000 feet, you have 30% less oxygen than at sea level.
Hmm.
So if you think about that, right? Like that is a significant amount.
Yeah.
Um, you know, if you think about just breathing and if you're I don't know, you're breathing through a snorkel that was, basically allowed 30% airflow, 30% less airflow, how would you do,
Hmm.
right? Um, not as well. And and then that doesn't count just purely saturation. It's an interesting phenomenon that
Yeah.
we live with, and that athletes for not ever, for a long time have utilized to hopefully increase performance.
Hmm.
But the tricky thing is that at altitude, as you've already alluded to, we have a decrease in performance,
Yeah.
right?
But
So
potential increase in training stimulus. So,
exactly. So that's the interesting thing to think about is, how do you manage this, both if you had to race at altitude
hmm.
or if you want to train at altitude to race not at altitude, because those are two different questions that often are in endurance sports and in sports in general are asked. And I'm sure, John, that you've asked that question, or you've had people ask that of you,
Yeah,
right?
and I wish I was able to get you this new wearable tech device I'm trying out right now, and I know you're going to try it out when you are back in town. It'd be interesting to see what happens to your EKG while
Oh
out at
yeah, at
altitude.
altitude.
Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
we are you and I are looking at this new heart rate monitor. It's a little pricey. It's like 300, $400. But it's let me bring it up. It's interesting. that it is, it's like a 12 lead EKG, but it's only one lead of the 12 lead. And so what they're able to do is increase how fast they're sampling heart rate data, electrical data, and in essence, just get what looks like an EKG. And it is an EKG, it's just one lead. So I
It's
got it,
really interesting.
yeah, I got it last week and started doing a couple of rides and doing some rest with it. And
Well, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but like an Apple Watch does an EKG on the wrist, and it's a
yeah,
one lead EKG as well. This happens to be on your head, right?
yeah.
So
So
it should be
I was talking with
potentially
someone.
more
Yeah,
accurate.
I was talking with someone about the Apple Watch and what, if I understand correctly, I don't have one, but it has the lead on the watch, and then you need to ground it with your other hand. Is that correct?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have one either.
Oh, yeah. So I think that's what I was told is then you need to take your other hand and bring it over. And then at that point, you have two leads, you have two contacts, so you have a circuit. So EKG is all about electrical activity of the heart muscle. And, if I put two leads, two stickers on, both my arms, I can actually pick up that electrical activity from the heart. And because the heart is it's a big muscle and it's contracting very synchronously. And so that electrical signal is very easy to detect. In fact, I was talking with my wife one day and she was having a problem with just her regular heart rate monitor, rubbing against her swim skin or something. I said, well, just turn it around and put it on your back. It will actually work on your back.
Of course, yeah.
Because it's such a big electrical pulse that you can pick up. Now, 12 lead EKG is simply picking up electrical activity from just different perspectives. And so that's the advantage of putting multiple stickers on the chest area, is then you can look at different sections of electrical activity or how the heart is contracting when you're looking at it from different angles. In essence, that's the concept of EKG. So this device that I'm showing here, this is a chest strap here. It looks like a normal chest strap, but it's sampling at a higher rate. And oh, here's the chest strap. Sorry, I'm pointing to the wrong window. And when it samples at a higher rate, it's actually able to get heart rate. Oh, of course, I clicked on one that doesn't have the EKG. So let's click on one that has the EKG. This is just resting. So now you recognize that as just a typical EKG strip.
Yep.
And this is just some summary metrics down here, so you can go through and look at the rhythm. You can inspect the EKG. Reading EKG, there's actually a lot of neat science and some good metrics to look at in terms of how this waveform, what its shape is, or how it may change with exercise or with altitude. So that would be interesting if you had this up there.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Not only your heart rate, which is this big spike, and that's what our normal heart rate monitors are picking up. They're just picking up that big spike. But now you'd be able to get into the granular details of how the electrical activity is coming out of the heart, which is start to give a sense of heart health at that point. So
John, can this do a heart rate variability as well?
it does, yeah. And up here, I haven't gone through all the different metrics that it gives, but this QTC interval, heart rate variability, as you know, I'll just explain it, is how variable the time is between these spikes, these peaks. And that's what you're looking at with variability. And so I'm not ashamed of this, but I do have some PVCs. There's one right there.
Yep.
All right. Well,
you got a few in there.
yeah, I have about one a minute. And so there's one right there at the 12-second mark. Whoop, sorry.
So PVC is premature ventricular contraction.
That's right. And
That means it's off. Your timing of your heart is off for one beat, basically.
That's right.
Some people can actually feel it, and that's the feeling of they say your heart skipping a beat.
Yep. No, it's spot on. And by themselves, they're not dangerous. It's just when they start coming in succession, then you start to get worried. Two in a row, probably not that bad. Three in a row, now you're starting to get worried. But they're pretty common. And
well, it's interesting, John, for endurance sports, is when people go hyponatremic.
mm-hmm.
If they're susceptible, as some people are, you can have a lot of PVCs. It's actually one of the
Interesting.
metrics you can use other than blood to
Oh,
actually determine if potentially if someone's hyponatremic.
interesting. Oh, that's
Yeah,
neat. So
but
yeah, so heart rate
you'd have to have an
variability.
EKG.
Yeah,
You have to have
right.
an EKG to tell.
And now with this device, I mean, you're going to get at least one perspective of EKG, and it's actually pretty neat. I think I see a lot of potential here. But then heart rate variability, what uh, what what I think the where we are with this is if your heart rate beats too steadily, that's
Yep.
probably bad. If it's too variable, that's probably bad too. So you got to
Yes.
find that sort of magic window where this time between this peak and this peak and this peak and this peak is not exactly the same, but it's changing a little bit each time.
You
And
know, we should do it. We'll do an episode on heart rate variability because I've actually measured my heart rate variability pretty regularly for the last 3 years
oh, cool.
on a pretty daily basis. Actually,
Yeah.
the last week I haven't. I don't know why I took my wrist-based thing off and I just haven't put it back on. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
no,
I became after 3 years I quit looking at it because I was like, well, I've kind of figured it out and I can tell when I'm having a good day and a bad day and
okay.
what to do to alter it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so
So
that's all related to this. And so now
yeah,
we're going to do some work with this device and start to look at it during endurance events. And so I think it's going to be a neat tool. In fact, at the aqua bike this weekend, we have one of our grad students who's going to wear it during his
awesome.
aqua bike. So we'll see what happens. So
Well, John, I think I should wear it during 70.3 Salem in 2 weeks.
totally. Yeah.
Yep, I think I'm gonna just because
Yeah.
I think that'd be some awesome data to get.
Oh yeah, no, because a lot of times when we're doing research, it's funny actually. I'm working with some students down at actually University of Arizona. They're part of a grant program, and they get involved with the lab, and it's their first research experience. And the one person was asking, "How do you ask a question about this?" I said, "Well, first you start trying to use it, you immerse yourself in it, and
Yep.
then you try to ask questions that you want the answer to, and then you go and look in the literature and see if someone's already answered it, and if
Yeah.
not, that's
Well, and the interesting thing is, like, if you go to the doctor, just the general doctor, and let's say they run an EKG on you,
hmm
what are you gonna get? You get your resting
yeah,
EKG,
right.
right? That doesn't tell you what's happening to your heart electrically 4 hours into a half Ironman.
No, that's right. I mean, it gives some. I used to work in cardiac rehab, and so it gives you some
Yep.
value, but you're spot on. You need to put the heart under a load and then see what's going on. In fact, when we used to do stress tests in cardiac rehab, we would put them through that incremental test, just like a max effort test, and we would want to elicit that chest pain that they were worried about or complaining about, because then once that chest pain happens, then we get an EKG strip, and then we can sort of pinpoint where in the heart there may be actually be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even on your stress test, John, when you did it, how long were those tests?
Well, the population I was working with was elderly and people with coming in with
Hmm.
suspected heart problems. So, I mean, one test maybe lasted 30 seconds, and this person had to stop. And I think the longest I did with that was probably around 12 or 15 minutes. But so they're not very long.
Okay. Yeah. So, I talking about the hyponatremic because in a half Ironman or an Ironman race, your electrolyte balance shifts quite significantly.
hmm
And we do know the importance of electrolytes, in particular, in the function of the heart and the electrical function of the heart. So yeah, I think this would be really interesting. And obviously we've talked about people dying in triathlon and dying in the swim
Yeah,
portion, but
right.
there are people that do die
hmm
from cardiovascular related incidents in the run and
Yeah,
on the
no,
bike
you're
even.
right. Yeah, especially hot marathons. And what's
Yep.
interesting about death in marathons is that the deaths occur near the end of the marathon, but deaths during triathlon, it's in the beginning of a triathlon in the swim. So yeah, no, yeah, so it'd be good for you to wear it for
Yeah.
Oregon 70.3.
Well, and we'll compare it to, at rest and
Yeah,
just see, ultimately I guess we're talking about what's under the hood. So this is some awesome tech. And John, do you know if is this something that someone could just buy off the
Yep.
shelf right now,
You
or is
can
it
buy
still
it.
in?
It's retail available. It's just a little pricey. I think it's like 300 or 400 bucks. So,
But I
um,
also think this is a thing that you could buy maybe with a group of friends, and because it's not something you'd want to wear all the time necessarily, and you could share it.
hmm yeah,
uh, You know, so who knows?
yeah, yeah. And
Awesome tech though.
early adopters, and it's always a little bit more expensive to get in it, but yeah,
Yeah,
no. So back to altitude, it would be really neat to
yeah,
have your EKG, and EKG and ECG is the same thing. It just depends on what
yeah.
country that you're learning it on, but um, it would be interesting to see what happens during this trip. Uh, what happened to
Yeah.
your EKG? So
So on my 8-week adventure, we started out obviously in Vegas at 2,000 feet, and then we went to Grand Junction, which was 4,000 feet. Then we went to Boulder, which was 5,600 feet. Then we went to Jackson Hole, which was 6,500 feet. So we slowly kind of made this gain up and up and up and up. And I actually did pretty well
mhm.
with altitude at that in those contexts. But also when in all those trips, I was doing climbs. So when we were in Grand Junction, I was over 10,000 feet on a couple of the climbs I did, and definitely felt it when I was up there. But you go back down to altitude and you feel okay. The swimming is the interesting thing to me. Like I really feel it swimming,
Oh, really?
and I wonder if that's because it's more the limiter is getting oxygen in.
Well, we got to get a pool up at Charleston because you were doing all that. You do that ride so often. Um,
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah, that's
you get exposure to altitude.
but
Uh,
exposure is not enough.
that's
And
right.
in the paper that you sent me today that we talked about that actually kind of prove that point. We'll talk about that.
Well,
But so anyways, then after that we went down to like we were at Coeur d'Alene after that, and in Montana we went down to 4,000 feet, then 2,000 feet, then we were in Portland, and then we were in Southern Oregon, closer to sea level. And so the last 3 4 weeks we've been at sea level, and then we went directly from the Bay Area up to Mammoth, and now we're at 8,000 feet.
mhm.
And I have to tell you, it feels horrible.
During
My
exercise
first,
or
yeah, during
during,
exercise. No,
yeah,
no, for me personally, just being here, no problem.
yeah.
My wife really struggles at altitude, and so she actually went home already. But you know, the first run I did, we got here on Monday. The first run I did just 10K, and I was going to go relatively easy, and even a 1% grade uphill. Oh man, it felt horrible, right?
Really?
But 1% downhill felt normal.
Oh, interesting. Now, did you take Cosmo on this run?
Nope, I was on my own because I didn't worried about his acclimatization.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Because he can't tell me if he's struggling. I guess well,
Huh.
he'd probably just lay down. That's how he tells me.
hmm
Um, so yeah, it's really interesting. Like the the downhill or the flat feels relatively normal,
hmm
but any little uphill, it's just crazy. And the interesting thing, John, is that my heart rate is about the same,
Mm,
but
interesting.
my respiratory system,
hmm
like I just feel like I can't get enough oxygen in. Like I'm just breathing so hard,
Right.
but my heart rate's normal.
Yep.
Like at that pace, that's my heart rate. And to me, that like physiologically, I personally don't understand it enough, and I want to read more about this and try and understand why the heart rate stays the same, but the respirations are so much more difficult
Mm.
because almost everything we talk about, like I teach classes in emergency management of athletes, and like when they have cardiovascular issues or respiratory issues, and pretty much a rule of thumb I teach is when your respiratory rate goes up, your pulse rate goes up,
hmm
or your pulse rate goes up, your respiratory rate goes up. But it doesn't seem to be following that here, and maybe it's not my respiratory rate. Maybe it's just difficulty breathing, and it's but it's very interesting how that goes. And then the second day I was here, I went to Yosemite and I did a huge climb, went from like 7,000 feet to 10,000 feet, and then rode at 10,000 feet. for a significant amount of time, or 9,000, between 10 and 9 and 10, and I had no power,
Mm.
like nothing. Like to do 200 watts was all I could manage. And for me, like I can cruise around at 200 watts easily, but like it was a struggle just to do 200 watts. And then I'm like, man, am I, is there something wrong with me? Like, but it literally, it's the altitude, and I think that your muscles get starved almost of oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And and I did read a little bit this week on it, and the interesting thing is we really don't understand the mechanisms completely
Yeah.
behind this, and how it works. And then the one other thing I'm going to add is, for those of you that with fancy watches, Garmin in particular does an altitude acclimatization score.
Mm.
So it tells you, I think it's if you're above 3,000 feet for a certain amount of time, it tells you how acclimatized you are and at what altitude you're acclimatized to. So today my watch says I'm acclimatized to 5,600 feet.
Ah.
And I don't know the algorithm behind it, but it has something to do with like how long you're actually at altitude, and if you're sleeping at altitude. I understand that even long, like intercontinental flights, you can actually get a score because you're pressurized. You're in the pressurized cabin for so long. But it is really interesting stuff to me. And before we got on, I told you that I'm racing tomorrow,
Yeah.
and it's just I'm doing a sprint triathlon, which I love doing sprint triathlons. But I don't know, man. Like it's a really, really hilly bike and really hilly run. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm gonna even manage going up in some of it's on quite like about half of it's on trail, and there's some steep sections of the trail, and I'm like, I don't know. I walked it today, and I was breathing, I was breathing
Ah.
heavy. So we'll
Well,
see. We'll see how it happens. Maybe tomorrow I'll wake up and my watch will tell me I'm acclimatized to 7,000 feet, and then I'll be okay.
yeah, well, and hopefully everyone else is in the same boat.
Yeah, it was interesting. We were at the athlete briefing today, and I was then talking to a guy, and I'm like, "So how you feel about the altitude?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm good." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, were you from here?" He's like, "No, I came in from Ventura this morning." And I'm like, "Have you ran yet?" And he's like, "No."
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, "Okay."
Mhm.
Well, like you said, if you're not exercising, you may not even notice it,
Yeah, right.
And for those of you that ski, when you get up to the ski hill and you go to, let's say, 10, 11, 12. Here I think the summit's 13,000 feet. um, you don't notice it as much
Hmm.
because you're not doing a lot of really hard work. You're taking the ski lift up and then you're kind of sliding down, and yeah, you feel like, oh man, I can't catch my breath, but you're like, oh, I'm working so hard. I don't know how hard you're actually working.
Mm.
It's more just maybe the lack of oxygen or the altitude. I don't even want to call it lack of oxygen, just the altitude
Yeah.
that's causing these things. So
So let's just take a step back and talk about heart rate VO2 relationship. So
yeah.
yeah, that is interesting what you're experiencing, but I don't think it's out of the norm. Uh, so heart rate, well, if you want to know your oxygen consumption, you need to know how fast your heart's beating, how much blood is pumped with each beat, and then how much or how much oxygen is extracted from the blood.
And that's the last piece, right? Is the key is how much, well, oxygen's in the blood and then gets extracted.
That's right. That's right. So that no, thank you. That's right. Because you need to know how much or excuse me, how much oxygen is in the arterial blood,
Yeah.
and then how much you are able to extract from it. And so maybe that's
And correct me if I'm wrong, that's a really hard thing to measure.
yes. You need to put in a sensor in your artery and then another
Yeah.
sensor in your vein.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's like,
Yeah.
I know some of my initial reading on this, because I know there's some companies that do like oxygen saturation,
Yeah.
and and they've had some successes, but it's a
Hmm.
really difficult thing to actually measure, because obviously you can't take the blood out, because as soon as you take the blood out, it gets saturated.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So and I don't know honestly how accurate those pulse ox machines are, but I
Hmm.
do know there's some research behind determining how somebody will do at altitude, So when you bring them up to altitude, bring an athlete up to altitude, and you measure their pulse ox,
Mm,
formulas out there that you can utilize to determine basically, number one, if someone will do well or not with training at altitude,
hmm.
and gives you some insight into how hard they should be training. And we can talk a little bit about that, but one of the things you're supposed to do is not train hard when you first get to altitude.
Yeah, right.
So of course, I do a 3,000-foot climb first thing. The second day I get here,
Hmm.
because I'm only here a short time. I want to do the good climbs.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Oh,
know.
that's good.
Well, and I'll add a little anecdote. The reason I did it is because we were supposed to drive through Yosemite to get here, and then we were about 100 miles away, and we saw some signs that said you need a reservation,
Mm,
and we didn't have a reservation, so we couldn't drive through Yosemite. And I've never been to Yosemite, but
hmm.
then I looked, it said bikes don't need a reservation, so I was like, oh, okay, I'll just ride my bike in. But to ride your bike in, I had to do this huge climb. So
That's great.
here's the thing, John. And you and I have talked about this before. You got to enjoy the training,
Yeah.
right? And for me, it's more about enjoying the training than getting the most out of the training.
Hmm.
You know, because I could have a very, very structured training. And we've talked about this before, right? Where on Monday you do this, on Tuesday you do this, and it's like you have to hit every single metric.
Yeah.
To me, that's not as much fun as like, hey, I'm gonna go climb this hill and
Hmm.
see what's at the top.
Yeah. No,
So
I agree with you. You got to have that sort of triathlon lifestyle or just active lifestyle, and you're doing
exactly.
racing on top of it. So, all
Yeah.
right. So let's talk about your race then. Are you adjusting any strategy? Have you thought about what pace you're going to try to hit based
Well,
on
I'm
altitude?
I'm I'm definitely going to number one swim a little slower
Hmm.
because I did a practice swim there yesterday. Well, and it was super super wavy. It was super big wind, but when we swam in the pool as well here, and it is just not tenable to swim at the pace I'd normally swim at.
Okay.
So I'm definitely going to dial that back. And then on the bike is actually, for me, I was thinking about not even having my power meter turned on,
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
like just going off a feel
But
instead of,
record it still.
I'm
Yeah.
going to record it, but I'm not going to
Mhm.
look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll just have like the clock screen up
Mhm.
instead, because I think I could get into trouble by actually going purely off of power.
Well,
Because
let's talk about that because
yeah,
now we can get more into some of the mechanics. Now I
yes.
can get a little more comfortable in that area. So, all right, but let's hear what are you going to do for the run?
So same thing. I think I'm not going to look at heart rate.
Hmm.
I'm just purely going to go off of feel. It's a 5K.
Yep.
Um, it's horrible, horrible footing for the first half a mile.
Okay.
It's like a little pea gravel,
Hmm.
and then goes into like really soft sand almost,
Right.
and you got to do this climb on this soft sand.
Hmm.
And so honestly, I think it's going to be completely on feel. And I've raced well on feel before.
Hmm.
And I think because the altitude and being so hilly, that I'm just gonna go off of feel. And honestly, this race was just happened to be here when we were here.
Hmm.
There was no, there's no plan for this. I'm racing a 70.3 in 2 weeks that I really want to do well at. So this is just, it's training, it's fun,
That's
and it's
great.
small. We went to the transition area today, and one of the people that's doing the race with us, she said, "Is this the smallest transition area you've ever seen?" I'm like, "I think it might be." And there's
Great.
there's four distances. They're doing like a open, a little short one. They're doing a sprint, an Olympic, and a half, all in the same
Great.
thing. And so it's great. I love local races,
No, total
and
grassroots type of event.
it's a grassroots thing. And I know, but so there's no pressure. It's like
Yeah.
just go as hard as I can go,
Hmm.
and but yes, there are definitely mechanisms at play, and yeah,
Right.
I don't know. It's tough.
Well, let's
It's a
talk
tough one.
about cycling because I know you and I have both sort of listened to different podcasts and have looked into the hour record
Yes.
and whether you do that at sea level or if you do that at altitude. So
Yes, and it's huge differences in
yeah,
power.
and and you're choosing one benefit over another, whichever direction you're going. So yeah, let's get the
Well, well,
physiology out.
yeah. Well, technically, I should go faster at lower power at
Mhm.
8,000 feet,
Yeah. Okay.
right?
Why?
But here's the big but on this one, John. Because obviously the air is less dense, so
Yeah.
you go through it faster. But those people that did hour records didn't have to climb,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you're at a constant wattage, and and really when you're going, because there's some good grades. There's like a 9-10% grade on one of the climbs. So I might be going 7 miles an hour.
Yeah.
It's not the air density that's slowing me down at that point. It's
Mm-hmm.
or speeding me up. It's the gravity.
Right. Right. All right. So
So yeah, on the downhills and the flats, I should actually be going faster at a
mhm.
lower wattage.
Yeah. So the two factors in play here are the physiology, how much oxygen you can get into your lungs and into your muscles, and obviously sea level is going to have a greater capacity to get oxygen to your muscles than altitude. And then the other factor at play is the aerodynamics. So you have less dense
Exactly.
air at altitude, and we know our drag force equation is 1/2 rho CdA squared, and the rho is the air density or fluid density, but air density in this case. And so if you have a lower rho, lower density, you could have less drag force. But you got to balance these two factors. You've got
So on
less.
the downhills, it should be going faster.
Yep, that's right.
So it's really interesting. Yesterday, we did a pretty good climb, and there was a it was a descent that was good pavement for a while.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, I looked down, I'm going 50 miles an hour.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm like, I don't feel like this steepness should be taking me to 50 miles an hour because it's going to be pretty steep to get to 50 miles an hour.
Yep.
But
Yep.
then I really started thinking about it. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm at 8,000 feet. Actually, there was 9,000. So I'm like, the air is way less dense here.
Yeah.
So if I'm kind of tucked down in an aero position, my CDA is, well, my drag is, the D is less.
Yeah, because the row is going
Yeah.
to, having less air density is going to reduce the drag force and
Yep.
therefore allow you to go faster. Did you run best bike splits on that? Or does best bike
I
splits,
didn't.
does it have an elevation, an altitude setting or?
And altitude, it does, because
Hmm,
it asks you your normal training altitude.
okay.
So it does put that into it. Yeah, I actually didn't run this because I'm like, well, it's the bike ride is only 8 miles,
Okay.
so it's so short. I should actually run it just to see. But then again, I have no idea what power I can actually do.
Hmm. Well, and air density is not a constant. It will change based upon humidity even. So even when you
That's
do that
right.
hour record, a lot of times what they're looking at is what's the best time to have the least air density. And
Well,
so,
that was with the Wiggins effort. That was one of the big things was
mm-hmm,
if they would have done it the day before, the air density, because the barometric pressure was so different between the 2 days. The day
mm-hmm,
before, they said he would have went like 200 more meters or something like that, or
mm-hmm.
250 more meters. I can't remember the exact numbers, but they had this all planned for TV and for sponsors, and everything was locked into the time. And it wasn't, even though this was an indoor velodrome, it wasn't the best time because of the barometric pressure. So you're right. So barometric pressure and humidity also, yeah, you're right. They'll play a role.
Interesting. Okay, so obviously you're traveling, so you don't have your disc with you, right?
I do not have a disc wheel with me.
So would you use the disc wheel?
Uh, I have a tattoo. A lot of people don't know, and then it's on my inner thigh, so most people don't see it. But it says "Always ride a disc."
Yeah.
So if I had it, I absolutely would ride it.
Yeah, okay.
But I did not bring the disc wheel with me.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Well,
So John, we could talk more about this effort, but I really want to talk about was Boulder 70.3, which is coming up,
hmm,
and a lot of athletes are going to be from Vegas are going to be racing it,
yeah.
And like, this was a whim for me to do this race, but people that are training specifically for Boulder 70.3, which is, that's between 5,000 and 5,500 feet.
Hmm.
And, you know, what, what advice do we give people that are going to be doing a race like that?
Yeah, the whole trick is acclimatizing or getting used to that new altitude. And so I think the general advice is get there early to acclimate if you can, or if you can't get there early, get there as close to the race day as possible.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. And
you're still going to suffer, but it probably is better than getting there sort of in between that period where you acclimate and where you're not acclimated. So
well, and it's interesting, right? Because the time to acclimatize depends on the difference between where you're living and where
yeah,
you're going, right?
that's
So
true.
from Vegas to Boulder is only like 3,000 foot difference.
Mm,
So someone coming from LA or the coast of there, they would need longer to acclimatize.
yeah. Hmm.
And and once again, everyone's an individual with this, how quickly
Yep.
they acclimatize. But it's something like, from what I've read, between 500 and 1,000 feet a day,
Hmm.
depending on the person,
Yeah.
that you can actually acclimatize. So if someone was coming from Vegas, let's say they were a slow acclimatizer and they did 500 feet a day, they'd need a week basically
Yeah.
to to really truly acclimatize. And we know that most people don't don't go to the race venue a week before.
No. Right.
Um, so then the other side is to, like you said, go maybe the day before.
Hmm.
And from my understanding, we don't really understand why, like the physiology of why. But what I read was one of the things is you do not sleep as well when you are making this transition. So I wonder if that's part of it. Is like, well, you're sleeping regularly, at least until maybe that last night, and that might have an influence. The other thing is supposedly appetite can be suppressed
Hmm.
when you're at altitude. So maybe like the 2 days before, if you say they're there 2 or 3 days before, maybe you don't get enough fuel in.
Hmm.
I'm just speculating. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I'm not as well read in that area, so I don't know. But so that comes back to you, practical experience right now. Are you changing anything in your diet?
I'm definitely eating less,
Hmm.
and not on purpose. I'm just not as hungry here, which is a weird thing, but because it seems like I'm always hungry because I'm always training.
Yeah.
That's true, and I definitely am not sleeping as soundly.
Hmm.
But that also could be because we have all the windows open to try and keep it cool, and it's a little noisy.
Hmm.
But um,
Yeah,
yeah, so we'll see.
and Boulder is that's always interesting reading the race reports because there you get people who say, "Oh, that the elevation didn't matter to me at all," and then you get others that really are sensitive to that. So.
Well, John, what do you think about, and obviously we will be speculating on this one. If someone was to race at a different percentage of their VO2 max. So we know that there's a big difference in athletes, right? So some people in a half will run close to 85 to 90% of their VO2 max. Others will be at 70.
Hmm.
So I wonder if maybe it's the people that are are at a lower percentage of their VO2 max that struggle, or that don't struggle as much.
Yeah, no, it's a good hypothesis. I mean, because obviously just sitting and resting and doing, 1% of your VO2 max, you're okay. So
Yeah.
then, yeah, so it's obviously gonna diverge as you get at a higher intensity. Yeah.
All right, I'll throw out one other hypothesis because I don't know, and just I love chatting with you about these things because we have some different perspectives. But what about substrate utilization,
Yeah, right.
right? If somebody is more of a fat burner compared to not, and they're burning more carbohydrates, do carbohydrates utilize more oxygen for
Uh,
consumption, or does fat
no, less.
less
Yeah, it takes more oxygen to
to utilize fat? That's right.
use that, right?
So there, so then in that case, maybe it is more the person that is less fat adapted
Hmm.
might do better. I don't know. Like once again, there's not been good research on this that I've seen.
No,
to determine these things.
I just quickly Googled that while you were talking, and is some work on it, but I'm not gonna. Yeah, it's gonna be too quick to
Yeah,
jump in and because every time you look at a study, it's
yeah,
you got to dive into it a little bit more. Um, but there is some work on substrate utilization and altitude.
yeah. So
Uh,
then I guess the next, going back to the original question, is what, other than getting there early, what else can be done?
well, I think again now I'm getting a little bit out of my area, but then it's always hydration and making sure that you are drinking because that does. I'm trying to think of the mechanism off the top of my head, but you want to keep your stroke volume up and you want to keep your blood volume up. And when you go to altitude, your stroke volume will tend to go down. Stroke volume is how much blood is pumped with each beat. And so you need to stay hydrated as you go up in altitude.
Well, and also I think that people don't recognize, as you go up in altitude, in general, humidity goes down,
Hmm.
right? And so then, yes, you potentially need more hydration just walking around the streets and stuff like that, because lower humidity, you might, I don't know, you might not recognize you're sweating as much.
Hmm.
So I mean, you could add that. So the other big one that I think, John, is, and we've touched on this before, and we were going to talk a little bit about tonight, was doing heat training,
Hmm.
because heat training increases blood plasma volume, which also helps keep stroke volume higher. So there's been a lot of talk on this lately and a lot of research on this, and the pundits are definitely in on this, of having if you don't have the ability to go to altitude, is you always have the ability to do heat training.
Hmm.
And even we talked about this before in our podcast, even in the winter, and you set up your cave, and don't turn the fans on.
Hmm.
you know so I think more and more people are actually preparing for altitude races, by doing heat acclimatization, even for colder weather races. Is this something that you've come across as well?
Yeah, this is really probably been more uh, showing up in the literature over the last 10 years in terms of using heat acclimatization instead of altitude training. And there, and again, I'm not as well read in the area, but the take-home message is that you can get probably just as good of a benefit doing heat training as you could from altitude training, and maybe even better. But and you don't have all
I
the
think the best would be both,
yeah, yeah, right.
right?
That's sort of what you're
And
doing right now.
yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because I was reading an article that was talking about, it was actually the Norwegian Olympic triathlon team, and them going to altitude in Spain, but then spending most of their time indoors.
Hmm.
So they're in these beautiful areas to ride their bikes, but their coaches had them riding their trainers
Hmm.
without fans on. So they were
Hmm.
actually basically double dipping
Hmm.
and getting the heat and the altitude.
Well, and so this is the trick is how do you expose the body to a new stress, environmental stress in this case for both of them, and still be able to train at a level to get a training stimulus? Uh, because there's obviously training, it's 120 degrees out. That's great heat, stress, but is that a great training stress?
Yeah,
Because now you're gonna train at a slower pace, and so this is that balance of what is the optimal.
you're absolutely right, and this goes back into the sleep high, train low.
Hmm.
And even these Norwegians, they were doing their intervals. They were driving down the mountain with their trainers, and they were doing their intervals at low elevation.
Hmm.
They were doing their long, slow rides at high elevation.
Yep.
And when you look deep into the research, deep enough in the research, you'll realize that the best possible for training is to sleep high, live high, do your zone 2 high, but
Mm.
do anything quality, and I hate to say quality, anything of high intensity at low altitude.
Yep.
So there are places in the world where you can do this.
Hmm.
So I know for sure some triathletes that live in Park City area,
Okay.
and they go down to Salt Lake City a couple nights a week to do their track sessions,
Hmm.
um, so they can do enough quality. They can get their speed high enough. and oxygen is not their limiter, but everything else, all of their long, slow stuff they do at altitude.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not that many places where you can actually like have a sustainable life, like a job, and live high and train low,
No, no.
and only train low a couple times a week.
Yeah, right. Charleston would, for locals, that would be a place.
Yeah, but here's the thing: is you got to live up there,
Yeah, that's right.
and I don't know about you, but I can't afford to live up there. I've looked.
Well, I got my trailer.
Yeah, there you go. But the campground's closed in the winter.
That's right. Have to just find a parking lot or something. So there's one more part, and I know that you're a big advocate of this as well, is the sauna after exercise.
Yes,
And
sauna or hot tubs.
yeah, and that's a really neat training stimulus. You want to talk about that one?
Yeah, so there's some good research on this one too, where you don't even have to train with heat.
Mhm.
You could just do your normal training and then finish off with a 20-minute hot tub, 30-minute sauna, 30-minute sauna. And the cool thing is what I've been reading on this is you can actually keep your heart rate in zone 2
Hmm.
if you get the temperature right.
Oh yeah.
So you actually are extending your zone 2 training cardiovascularly. And then one of the things they said in the dry sauna especially is just move around a little bit. That's all you need to do, right? Like you could do some active recovery, you could do some stretching, and you can get your heart rate to stay in zone 2. But what we're seeing is you can actually increase your blood plasma volume almost to the same extent as if you were training the entire time in the heat.
Hmm.
But it takes a lot of discipline, to let's say go for a 3-4 hour bike ride, and then maybe in Las Vegas today you wouldn't want to do it, but let's say in the spring, let's say 80 degrees outside,
Yeah.
and then finish your ride and then go sit in a hot tub
Mm-hmm.
or in a sauna for 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's
And
hard.
it's hard. It's really
Mhm.
hard because the first thing you want to do is have a nice cold drink and maybe even a cold shower and cool yourself down. But really, the benefits come from that.
Hmm.
I don't know. Have you ever tried it?
No, I have not. Well, I was doing some hot tub after some training sessions, but
Okay.
not enough on a regular basis. But because trying to get ready for a race like Kona, that it does cool down here right before
Yes.
that race, and so you do lose a little bit of that heat, to prep yourself for that hot and humid race.
Yeah. So the one other thing you can do in Vegas. So this is the cheating way to do it. Now, obviously, in Vegas in the summer, you could just go outside, right?
Hmm.
And you try not to do heat training in the summer in Vegas. But let's say in those transition times, so going to Kona, for example, that 1 month before where we start to cool down and maybe you want to do some more heat training, the cheap way to do it is finish your training and then go for a drive in your car with the windows up and turn your heat on.
Hmm.
And yeah, you'll sweat through your upholstery pretty good, but I've been known to do that, John.
Oh, nice.
As you know, the last 3 years before COVID, I raced in Miami every November in the long course nationals.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And when I was driving home from work on days wasn't commuting, I actually would turn the heat on in my car as high as it would go
Oh,
and make that 40-minute, 35-minute commute home. And just I'd get home and I would just be drenched head to
oh.
toe. And Marie she'd be like, "What is going on with you? Why are you so sweaty?" And I'm like, "Well, heat training.
No,
Hey, you know what? You got to double dip your time.
that's
Like I got
right.
to drive home. Got to drive home anyways. Might as well do my acclimatization in my car
That is being optimal right there. That's
because I
awesome.
don't own a sauna, but I do own a sauna. It's my car.
Yeah. That's great. Then get a little mister in there and
Yeah,
got,
spray water on me as I'm going. Increase the humidity in there. Yeah. So that's a pro tip. That might be the tip of the day.
that's it.
Um, your own heat chamber is your car.
Well, and I think, in each of these situations, altitude and heat, I mean, what you're trying to do is just push the body outside of what it's normally used to, and the body will adapt. And a lot of times when you adapt to altitude or heat, you end up getting a training benefit.
John, I love the fact that you said that, because it's something that I've really been thinking a lot about recently, and I think we talked about it maybe a couple weeks ago, is changing the stimulus. I
Hmm.
think we talked about it when we talked about swimming, and how this summer I've really focused on short, hard intervals,
Hmm.
not so much long stuff, because my body needed a different stimulus,
Hmm.
right? And it's the same with the training. Like you can't do all the same training, because your body it'll adapt, and that'll be what you're good at, is that one thing. And so throwing different stimuli is important. And it's interesting, we haven't really touched on it much, but one of the things that I'm seeing more in the athletic training literature is people purposely dehydrating themselves.
Well, that's part of
But
the sauna trick.
exactly.
Hmm.
But like, for example, go on a 3-hour bike ride and not don't bring water.
Yeah.
and it's for, the theory is that, okay, well, your body's going to recognize that you have this low blood plasma volume, and when you replenish it with water, it's going to overcompensate.
Right.
So then the next time you give it that stimulus, it's not as hard on them.
Hmm.
And even if you look at like high level marathoners, they're now planning in their races for weight loss.
Hmm.
And and if you look at, for example, like the National Athletic Trainers Association's position statements on like dehydration and heat and stuff like that, they say, well, you shouldn't lose more than 2% of your body weight, and when you do, you're going to impair performance. We see high level marathoners routinely losing 4 or 5%
Hmm.
by the time they finish. And some of the reading I've done, they're basically saying, well, I have that much less weight,
Hmm.
so I'm carrying less water, and so there's a benefit
Yeah.
to it. And so what 5 years ago, if you'd asked me as an athletic trainer, well, should people train in a dehydrated state, I would have said absolutely not. It's not safe. It's not a good thing to do. But high level talented people are messing with these things, and it's to mess with the homeostasis.
Yeah, no, this is great that you brought that up because you're spot on. I mean, there's been some good work on dehydration for marathon runners, and you're spot on is that some of the top finishers are the most dehydrated. And the other part to that, which is really, related to the dehydration, is the top finishers also had the highest core temperatures. And
Yep.
so now you start to rethink things a little bit, and you think, well, to be an elite runner, you need to be able to tolerate high core temperatures and levels of dehydration because partly your benefit that you're lighter, but that dehydration is because if you're getting to a point where you're not that sweating mechanism isn't as effective at cooling you, now your core temp is going to go up. You're running that much faster. That's also driving that core temperature up. We talked about heat balance before, and
But
so
here's the thing: is that one other thing I was reading, and so you mentioned you're running faster. When you run faster, you have higher convection rates,
that's right. That's right. Yep.
right? So if you think about Kipchoge, for example,
Hmm.
he's running at, what is it? I forget, the 13 miles an hour,
Hmm.
right? Well, 13 miles an hour of wind going across you
Hmm.
is quite significant. You think
Yep.
about standing on a 13-mile-an-hour wind. So
Right.
he would benefit of more conductive cooling as an elite runner than somebody that's running, let's say, a 4-hour marathon. So they're going 6.5 miles an hour,
Hmm.
right? They're not going to get nearly as much conductive cooling.
Yeah, and unless he's running behind a car in a pack of runners.
Exactly.
That would have been
Exactly.
so cool to do. I wonder if they did measure core temp while he did that sub 2.
Oh, I bet they did.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting to know how that would compare to a normal run.
Yeah. Super. John, these are such interesting things. And, obviously our talks have been mostly geared towards age group triathletes, but this information is getting out there, and it's starting to come, more and more people are utilizing these strategies.
Hmm.
So I think it's
Yeah,
fascinating.
no, it's fun just to talk about it. And even though we don't know all the answers, it's still hopefully this stimulates some thoughts from other folks, and they look into
Yeah.
this a little bit.
Well, and honestly, and I'll close by saying this. I for one really appreciate the people that have been commenting on the Facebook page,
Hmm.
and asking questions and thinking deeply about some of the things we've talked about. I think it stimulates good conversation and oftentimes opens up more topics for us to talk about.
Yeah.
So keep them coming.
No, that's great. I agree. So let's see, you've got your race.
Yeah, you're putting on a race.
Oh yeah, we've got our aqua bike Sunday. Hopefully, we are watching the temperatures because it's just gonna be like 97 in the morning. It's
Ooh.
just,
But
I,
like we just talked about with convection, I think it's the safest thing you can do as an aqua bike, because
mhm,
you're going to
yeah,
be somewhat cool coming out of the water. You got is it 12-mile bike?
yep, yep, yep.
So, you're not out there very long, you're not exposed very long, and
Mhm,
the convective cooling should be
mhm.
enough to, people I think will be okay. Really, it depends, I guess, on the park, right? Will they pull your permit if it gets too hot?
No, I talked with the Rangers today, and they were helpful. They actually gave some good suggestions on what to do. And fortunately, we've put some races on, and it's been good. We've got an EMT who's going to be there. We've got lifeguards that are going to be there. So we're pretty well prepared, but still, you gotta, the ranger, and I like this, he said, put two cars out there, just driving the course back and forth, be able to pick up someone in case they do have to stop and get in a car and, cool off. So that's good.
Awesome.
So we're doing that.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that. I will unfortunately be missing that. That'll be my last one I'm going to miss, though, I think.
Oh, right. Then
Back
we have
in
our
back
last
in
one.
Vegas.
Yeah, then we got our last one on the 28th of August. So
Yeah,
good.
cool. And I guess the just with that, the last one, what is the format for the last one?
Triathlon again. Oh, but we do have our test event on the
Exactly.
21st. I haven't put it out there yet, but the 21st of August, we're going to do a swim run test event out at
Yeah.
Lake Las Vegas.
And we're tentatively going to do it at night, right?
Yes,
Is that,
that's right. So we do have the option to do it as an evening event. So that'd be
yeah.
cool.
I'm so looking forward to that. It's going to
Yeah,
be great.
no, that would be
All right,
fun.
John. Well, hey, have a great weekend, and look forward to seeing you in person next week.
Yeah, likewise, and have a great race.
Okay, thanks.
All
Take
right,
care.
all right, talk soon.